Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough. Coming up, every year the AARP puts together 99 great ways to save that provides tips to help consumers save big dollars. We are joined later by the deputy editor of AARP Bulletin magazine to share some saving tips. What tips does AARP have for deals at the grocery store? Then, poor air quality has led to longer hospital stays for children with asthma, according to new research. A medical student from the Einstein College of Medicine shares more about this finding. What factors have caused people with asthma to stay in the hospital? After that, veterinarians are becoming increasingly worried about marijuana poisoning in dogs who eat discarded joints. The founder of City Pets joins me later to discuss the dangers of discarded joints to dogs. What is treatment like once a dog has been affected by marijuana poisoning? Following that, the Supreme Court has deemed President Biden's student debt relief program unlawful. A senior economist for LendingTree tells us what this means for millions of borrowers. How can people prepare for the restart of their payments? And finally, organization Girl Be Heard aims to engage youth and advance dialogue about social justice issues affecting their communities. The program director and a company member of Girl Be Heard tells us more later on. How do they get young kids engaged in social issues? So stay tuned, all this and much more is headed your way because we're now officially open. Hello everyone, I'm Kibin Alleyne, and today is Tuesday, July 18th. You are now watching Open, a program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. If you're looking for ways to save money in today's economy, the 14th edition of AARP's Bulletin 99 Great Ways to Save could help you find what you're looking for. AARP's finance experts have compiled a comprehensive list of tips and tricks to help consumers save thousands of dollars annually using shopping apps, digital coupons, and more. Joining me to discuss what you can do to save big is Deputy Editor for AARP Bulletin and the magazine, Neil Wertheimer. Neil, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
Now, can you first just tell our viewers about AARP's 99 Great Ways to Save?
We've been doing it for 14 years. We send out reporters to find the latest tools, the apps, the discount programs, and also some clever frugality, old school frugality advice, and put together a new batch every year.
So I want to jump into talking about some of the different ways that we can save. So can you just talk about your top tips for finding deals at the grocery store?
So the top recommendation is to do several things, three things in particular, before you even leave your home. Number one is to take a good look at what's in the refrigerator and the pantry and eat them down before you go. Eat what you bought last week. Americans continue to throw out 30% of the food that they buy. So talk about wasted money. Eat what you buy. Second is you want two shopping lists, not one. The first shopping list is for the things that you specifically need for the meals you want to cook in the coming 7 days or so. The second shopping list is it's a rolling list for pantry items that you're going to need to stock up at some point, but those you want to wait until you get the best possible price. So when you see that butter is $1, $1.50 off a pound, that's the time to sweep in and get several pounds that'll last you a couple months. The third thing to do before you leave home is to look at your grocery store website, or even better, their app. Now, 2/3 grocery stores offer coupons online that you can't get anywhere else. The store I shop at, I checked this morning, they had 230 online coupons that were pretty amazing prices, like $1.88 a pound for chicken breasts, which you could not have gotten if you hadn't checked their website.
Now, I also want to talk about just driving costs because, as we know, that can be very expensive. Do you have any suggestions on how to cut down on that expense?
Well, it's all about gasoline. So you have two strategies there. One is to get the best possible gas price, and then it's all about get the best possible fuel efficiency. For gas price, if you're a member of a warehouse club, by all means, go there and get the gas there because it's up to 25 cents a gallon less. If you have a favorite gas station, they often have a credit card or a discount fuel program. Consider those. Don't want to do that? Get a credit card with cash back. There are many credit cards that will offer 3% rebates or cash back for gasoline purchases. Finally, if you can't do any of those, pay cash. It's still often a nickel a gallon cheaper, and over time that adds up. So that's one side of the equation. The other side is fuel efficiency. We found a fascinating study that showed that every 100 pounds of stuff in your trunk wastes 2% of your gas efficiency. Likewise, your tires, if they're overinflated or underinflated, 2 to 3% efficiency loss. Most of all, it's how you drive. If you're driving 80 miles per hour, you are 27% less efficient than if you're going 60 miles per hour. So bad news, we know who you are. Slow down a little, mellow out as you accelerate and deaccelerate. And over time, that really does add up to serious savings.
Now, I want to switch gears just a little bit. As we know, it's summertime and people love to travel. Now, this isn't a necessity, but do you have any advice for people taking a last-minute vacation and just kind of want to do something extra to enjoy their time?
Well, we found a sweet spot in booking airplane tickets. It's 28 to 35 days prior to departure. A study showed that will get you 10% or more of a discount compared to waiting until a few weeks before departure time. Likewise, a separate study showed that if you book on Sunday, you can save 5 to 15% based on destination compared to booking it on Friday. So timing is very important when booking airfares. The other thing we found is that independently owned hotels are much more open to negotiating than chain hotels. And we found also that the best way to communicate is an email to the manager. Send them a note saying, we're coming to town these dates, bring my family, we're looking forward to it. We would love to stay with you, but we're really looking for the best price. How can you take care of us? That kind of positive, direct interaction will often score you a very good deal.
Now, we have about a minute or two left. Can you just let us know how do you continue to find these new ways to save? Because I think they're very interesting.
Well, in any community at any time, certain stores are coming to town, are opening up. Older stores are creating new discount programs. There's all kinds of new apps that are coming on board to help people shop. A frugal shopper keeps an eye out of what's going on at the stores they frequent, but at the same time, we're always pushing old-fashioned frugality. I keep saying that a solution of 50% vinegar, 50% water is the best window and glass cleaner around. Why pay $6 for a store-bought bottle when for 25 or 50 cents you can make your own? This combo of being everyday frugal and keeping an eye out for what's happening in the retail world around you is the best combo for saving lots of money over time.
Well, and I definitely agree, and I'm so glad we were able to have this conversation. Now, this was just a sneak peek, basically, of all the ways that people can save. Can you quickly just let people know where they can go to learn more?
AARP.org/ways to save will get you to the 99 Great Ways to Save list. There are, I believe, 20 bonus tips we created for you online, and you can also find some of the past year. So a couple hundred money-saving tips are right there.
All right, Neil, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
If you would like to find out more about AARP's 99 Great Ways to Save, or maybe you know someone who is also looking for some helpful tips, please go to the website at www.aarp.org/ways to save. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Open right after this.
Come on. Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Yeah.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff, like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. Of course, it's awkward to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping. Hey, bestie, how sketch is me? It's hard to get their attention. Ready? Go. Yes, look at that. You even turn yours over. So if you want to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping, you have to get it trending. Right, backpack kid?
Let's do it.
First, invite your kid to do the vape talk. Let's try this. All right.
Why is he here?
Yeah, I gotta get it trending, honey.
Come on.
To the left. To the right. Let's go.
Oh, honey, can we talk?
Yeah, what's up?
I see a lot of your friends vaping.
Visit talkaboutVaping.org for tips on when and how to have the vape talk.
Welcome back. A recent study by researchers at the Children's Hospital at Mupier found that children with asthma experience extended hospital stays when exposed to higher levels of air pollution. This study is extremely relevant following the recent wildfire smoke that covered New York City, exposing New Yorkers to high levels of unhealthy air quality. Joining me to discuss this finding is a medical student from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, Jennifer Hardell. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So we're talking about asthma. As many of us know, it's a common health condition in this country affecting millions of people. But can you just talk about how asthma affects children in comparison to adults?
Yeah, asthma is much more common in children. In fact, it's one of the leading causes of emergency room visits and hospitalizations all over the country. Children's lungs are especially susceptible to damage, and that's why many children develop it. But luckily, about 2/3 will outgrow these symptoms as they grow up, so that's why it's less common in adults.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that you can outgrow that, so Thank you so much for sharing. Now, can you tell me about the study led by Dr. Elissa Gross that you were a co-author on that examined how children who experience asthma recently face more frequent and longer hospital stays?
Dr. Gross and I treat patients who are hospitalized for asthma, and it happens, unfortunately, very often. In this study, we analyzed about 2,000 medical charts of children hospitalized for asthma here at CHAM in the Bronx, and we looked also at the amount of pollution that they were exposed to just prior to their admission. And we found that children that were exposed to high levels of pollution actually stayed in the hospital longer. So, for example, we looked at this certain size of what's called particulate matter, something we call some forms of air pollution, and we also call it PM 2.5, if you ever hear about that. And they're tiny pieces of solids or gases that are created by smoke from vehicles or factories or wildfires. And what we found was that while the average length of stay for these children was about 2 days, for every elevation of this PM 2.5 by 10, the hospitalization actually was extended by a quarter of a day, about 10%. So as you can imagine, with more and more pollution, a quarter of a day turns into a half a day, and that can have real impacts on families.
Now, our city recently faced intense poor air quality. How did this affect those with and without asthma?
Yeah, when the smoke rolled in, we could really see that particulate matter. But it's important to notice that especially the Bronx, but many places have air pollution that we can't see. And so the Bronx has a lot of air pollution from the vehicles and highways. But with the wildfires coming in, we could actually really see it. And I mean, that level of air pollution is not good for anyone's lungs, but especially children with asthma. It really affected them. And anecdotally, me and my colleagues at the hospital, we really think we saw more hospitalizations, more symptoms, and even children were coming in with pretty mild asthma that needed to be hospitalized.
Now, you mentioned that it's just more prevalent in the Bronx where we see this poor air quality. It seems like we all share, one city, but why are we seeing this in the Bronx?
Asthma is about 3 times more common in the Bronx than elsewhere. For instance, in the rest of New York City, or the rate in the Bronx is about 17% of kids have asthma. In New York City, it's about 11%, and in the country, it's about 5.8%. So there are lots of interconnected factors that are hard to piece apart, but the Bronx has really high rates of smoking, mold, pests, excess weight. All of these are risk factors for asthma, but a big one is air pollution. I mean, the Bronx has the worst air pollution in the city and the state, and that likely plays a huge role.
And I understand it has like the worst, I believe, federal air quality. Can you just expand on like what that is?
Just compared to the rest of the country, the air quality in the Bronx is much worse, probably due to a lot of the highways and things that are in the Bronx and distribution centers for the city.
Now, I want to talk about something that I think we don't really think about when we talk about like children that are hospitalized, and it's their development and how it affects them just mentally and possibly their families as well. Can you expand on, how these longer hospital stays can affect a child's development?
Yeah, so when asthma gets really bad and a child's hospitalized, obviously that's really scary for their parents, for them. And when they stay in the hospital longer, that means more absences from school, less activities they can do, less time with their families. And over 13 million school days are missed across the U.S. from asthma. And it's been shown that kids who have uncontrolled asthma do worse academically due to all of these absences. So it can really have an impact academically and socially.
Now, what are some other factors or social determinants that can contribute to this?
Yeah, socioeconomic status plays a huge role in so many health conditions. We see it every day at the hospital, unfortunately. And many people without wealth don't have the money to afford to live far away from highways and other things that create this air pollution. They may live in older apartments that have that are more prone to mold and pests, and they may not have air conditioning so that they can stay inside on those bad pollution days. They may not have access to parks and other green spaces they can go to that help filter the air. But this is just one example of many where people of lower socioeconomic status bear the brunt of all the pollution and other environmental impacts of human activities. Yeah.
Now, I also like that we're talking about this because I think a lot of times in healthcare, people think that you can determine, what your health outcome is. And we see that that's not always the case. And this is pretty much a public health issue. What should be done, or what do you think could be done to ensure that people throughout the city are getting better air quality?
This is very tricky, and there's a lot of research, and honestly, there should be more put into this. We need to think about environmental policies that will help everyone. For instance, I know there's been talk of recently congestion pricing, meaning putting a toll on cars that go in the busiest part of Manhattan. But research has shown that actually that will increase pollution in the Bronx because more cars will bypass Manhattan and go through the Bronx instead of Manhattan. And so I think it's important that we do research and really develop smart policies that really take into account those already most impacted, like people here in the Bronx.
Now, while hopefully people do work towards that, what can people do in their homes to better the air quality, especially for those who have family members with asthma?
Yeah, it can be really hard because it feels like a lot of this isn't under your control. What can we do? But there are some things you can do. There are a lot of things that can trigger asthma, and the first thing is to really look at your home and make sure that we mitigate those things. So for instance, fires, gas stoves, cigarette smoke is a big risk factor. And as I said, mold and pests, all of those things can trigger asthma. And then if you're worried about air quality, like it's really bad outside, you can get pretty cheap air filters that can help filter the air. And you can honestly make it with a really cheap air filter and a box fan, but just make sure that you change that regularly to make sure it's still filtering the air. When you do go outside, and I'm sure many of us saw this with the wildfires, there are resources that we can look at to see what the actual air quality is outside. Even just your weather app on your phone will tell you, or EPA's airnow.gov will tell us what the pollution is outside. And if it is bad and you need to go outside and your child or someone in your family has asthma, make sure you have their medicine on you, the rescue albuterol inhaler that they can take. And also an N95 mask can also be helpful. But Montefiore has a renowned asthma center that can really help develop a plan that's perfect for your family that hopefully can help prevent a hospitalization.
All right, well, Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for joining us and educating me and our viewers on this.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
To keep up with all the amazing work the Children's Hospital at Montefiore does, please go to their website at www.cham.org. Stay tuned, we have more open for you right after this.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. Can you see anything different as a pill?
No.
You don't know?
Fentanyl is being mixed into everything now. There's only one thing that will save somebody's life. That is naloxone nasal spray.
Fentanyl, it's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable.
Why would drug dealers put a lethal dose of fentanyl in drugs if they know it's so harmful?
Really just all about the money.
I just didn't realize that one pill could change your whole life.
More kids should know.
Is it time yet?
It's time.
Cornstarch chocolate dinner.
Oh, terrific.
Donating pet food is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
Welcome back. With an increase in legal marijuana use, discarded joints are becoming a hazard for dogs in areas like New York City. The opening of the first legal recreational marijuana dispensary in New York has resulted in more people smoking in public, which has led to an increase in dogs accidentally consuming these discarded joints or edibles. Veterinarians and pet owners are now worried about the rise in poisonings and attribute it to smokers who litter without realizing the harm it can cause to pets. The founder of City Pets, Dr. Amy Attas, joins me to discuss. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, because this is a problem that can be prevented with education. I've been a vet for more than 3 decades, and I've always seen marijuana toxicity in my patients, but it was a rare finding because people who smoked marijuana didn't really leave it out, and occasionally a pet would find something. Things really changed a few years ago when it became legal for recreational use, and I personally feel the difference from December 31st of last year until now, when recreational dispensaries were opened in New York City. So I think the thing we must realize is that, marijuana comes in multiple forms, and every one of them is toxic to dogs. So we have people smoking joints on the street and without realizing the significance, discarding the end of the joint, where, of course, dogs find everything they're not supposed to on the street and can eat them. But they're also enjoying their marijuana in an edible form, which we have to really stress because these are delicious. And you leave them out on the counter and your dog is going to find them as well.
I want to talk about that because you mentioned inside the home as well as outside the home. When did you begin to realize that this was an issue? I guess more recently.
So, ironically, earlier on in my career, inside the home was where pets were getting intoxicated and from the THC because people would have their marijuana out while they were smoking it and the animals would get into it. Now with edibles, that's a big problem. Remember, a lot of edibles are made with chocolate. Very delicious for dogs, also very toxic. So when they ingest that, they're getting the double whammy. They're having the effects of THC, which is toxic, and also the effects of the chocolate, which are toxic. Some of the other edibles are made with fake sugars like aspartame, which are so lethal to dogs because their bodies recognize that aspartame as a super high dose of sugar. They get an insulin release and they die of hypoglycemia. So these products are really toxic to dogs. One more way dogs get injured by marijuana is through the smoke. Again, they can get that secondhand smoke and it causes lung damage and also gives them the toxic effects of the THC.
So I want to talk about what you said about the toxicity. Is it as in basically the pet could die, or is it just like they'll have a bad reaction to it?
So some pets die. That's not the typical reaction we see. I think it depends on a few things. It depends on the quantity ingested and also how high the THC level is in the marijuana. In the old days, marijuana didn't have as much THC. They've perfected, making that much, much stronger. So typically, the patients, they look different. They get the dilated pupils and the glassy eyes. So they have that look like they're stoned, but they're not having a pleasant stone. It affects their central nervous system. They become uncoordinated and wobbly. Many dogs will hurt themselves by falling down steps or having injuries from their inability to walk properly. It affects their heart rate. It affects their blood pressure. So these dogs are sick. They're not high. They're sick, and they need medical attention.
I want to ask, if someone is at home and they notice, this behavior or these symptoms in their dog, what are some tips you would give them, or what should they look out for to know that this is, the response?
So the first thing is, if it's just happened, we want to do what we can to induce vomiting, because if we can get the substance out of the dog, they're not going to have as much of a toxic effect. So hydrogen peroxide given orally to dogs will make them vomit. If you are unable to do that or don't have the facility to do that, take your dog to the emergency room. Step 1, get the substance out. Step 2, we give them activated charcoal to help absorb the material and make it less of a load as it's going through the bloodstream. And then after that, it's all about supportive care to get them through the next few hours with the effects that it has on their central nervous system and their cardiovascular systems.
Now, I want to know, is this a common occurrence in New York City? And how often are people going to the vet because of this type of incident?
I wish I had the exact numbers for you. This is not what we call a reportable disease. So veterinarians aren't required to give this information into a central system. I wish we had that number. I think it would be helpful in educating people on how dangerous this is. But what I do know is emergency rooms around the city are reporting much higher caseloads of marijuana toxicity. So you can, as a veterinarian, I can diagnose this with a FaceTime. People say their dogs are acting weird. I look at them and I know. They have this characteristic, as I said, dilated pupil, funny look about their eyes, they're vocalizing, they're drooling, and then they'll often urinate when they're not aware that they're urinating. Classic signs of marijuana toxicity.
Now, last year, there was an 11% increase from the roughly 6,200 cases reported in 2021. And over the past 5 years, there has been a 300% increase. Why may this number be rising? And, as a veterinarian, what are some of your fears in regard to that?
I know this number is going to rise because more and more people have availability of marijuana and they're smoking in public places. It's hard to identify whether someone is smoking a cigarette or a marijuana joint, so they get away with it easily. And I think without education, we're going to see people discarding their joints like they've always discarded their cigarettes, which are toxic as well when dogs eat them, on the street. And I feel like this is an accident that doesn't have to happen. Nobody who's smoking marijuana on the street wants to hurt dogs. And if they understand that discarding their joints like this could cause a dog to spend a night or two in the hospital at a great expense to an owner, I know that they wouldn't discard their joints. If people knew that the edibles were so dangerous for dogs, they'd be a lot more careful with them. What I wish we could do is have a way of identifying this danger when people are buying their marijuana products. Signs in stores, public service announcements. This is a problem that can be 100% prevented. People can have their marijuana and just keep it away from animals. By the way, all animals, cats too, right. Birds as well, very, very toxic if ingested to any of these creatures.
Because you mentioned the other animals, I think this is not just like a personal thing to a pet owner. It's, for our wildlife, New York City, just in general. Do you think our city should step up and act on this and possibly create a law or have a station where people can safely dispose of their joints?
I think we have stations where we could safely dispose of our joints. We can throw them in the garbage. We can put them out, put them in our pockets and get rid of them at home. It's about courtesy to others on this planet. We just need to be careful. I don't think people do this on purpose. Let's educate them to the dangers of marijuana to animals.
And then can you just talk about the emotional effect this has on pet owners as well as their pets?
So I think there are two pet owners we have to think about. The one who inadvertently makes their own pet sick by leaving out a product that makes their animal sick. I mean, emotionally, that must be devastating to know that you were the cause of your animal getting sick. You're going to get punished for that. The vet bills are high when you take your dog to the doctor for this. So I think that's something you're only going to do once. And then, of course, someone taking their pet out for a walk, thinking they're going to have a lovely experience, who, maybe you're on your phone for a second or you're not paying attention and your dog picks up something, the guilt that you have that, you're in charge of keeping them healthy and you took your eye off the ball for a moment. So there's a lot of emotional attachment to this.
So can you just briefly let us know, what can pet owners do to just avoid this from happening and harming their pets?
I think when you walk your dog, that should be your sole attention. Don't talk on the phone. Don't be doing other things. Keep your dog on a short leash and watch what they're doing. They can pick up something toxic in a millisecond. So I think more attention, and perhaps, don't let your dog off the leash in an area where you think there might be a high likelihood that they could find something like discarded joints.
Exactly, especially like in places like parks where people, they think it's safe for their animals to just maybe roam free. They give them a little bit more freedom, but those are also places where people go to smoke. So I 1000% agree.
Lots of potential dangers there.
Well, Doctor, I want to thank you so much for joining us and educating us and the Bronx community about this.
I want to thank you because I think we can prevent this problem with education.
If you would like to learn more about the amazing work Amy Attas does, Dr. Amy Attas does, please go to her website at www.citypets.com. We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more Open right after this.
Most hiring algorithms would scream me out.
Some bosses couldn't see me as a leader.
I've run this place for 20 years, but I still need to prove that I'm more than what you see on paper. I've been running code as long as I've been able to reach a keyboard.
This is what I do. It's second nature for me, coordinating 100 details at once.
It's the way my mind works. I have a very mechanical brain.
I sold them on my skills.
You gotta be so good they can't ignore you.
My magic is
analytics and empathy. That's how I'm getting clients. You have to have the confidence in yourself to show up and defy the odds.
I am more than who I am on paper.
I never got a college degree. And today, I'm the CEO of my own company. People want to tell me I'm one in a million, when actually I'm one of millions. Stars are all around us. It's time for them to shine.
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas.
You know it's true.
Mom, we love you always.
Everything I do.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
Welcome back. President Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness plan was blocked by the Supreme Court, which would have provided up to $20,000 of relief to struggling borrowers, causing a significant setback for many people across the country. To discuss the implications of this decision for millions facing student loan debt, we have Jacob Channel, an economist at LendingTree and a student loan expert, joining us for discussion. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this feels like a never-ending situation, and there's been so many things that have changed. But for those who haven't been following, can you just give us some insight on the previous battles with student loan forgiveness?
Sure. So, student loans have been a part of American politics for quite some time now, going back to the early 1900s and the 60s, if you want to talk about federally backed student loans. And more recently, in the last decade or so, there's been a really big push toward broad student loan forgiveness. Now, student loan forgiveness that's more targeted has existed for decades before that. Certainly, there were laws or things in the 1990s, for example, that made it easier for teachers to discharge student loans. But this kind of thrust for broad student loan forgiveness has really picked up steam more recently, largely because more people are going to college now. There's more of an emphasis put on going to college, and more people, unfortunately, are also graduating with student loan debt. So in a nutshell, what's kind of happened recently is that President Biden, when he was campaigning, he said he'd think about maybe proposing broad student loan forgiveness. once he was elected, he followed through with that. And he, as you pointed out, tried to forgive up to $20,000 for certain borrowers. And, it's been sort of a long back and forth, as I'm sure anyone with student loans can tell you, without meaning to say so. And unfortunately, it ended up at the Supreme Court, where they very recently, in the last few weeks, struck it down.
Now, as mentioned, the Supreme Court ruled the Biden administration overstepped its authority in trying to cancel or reduce student loans for millions of people. Can you just explain, what does this mean, or how did they come to this conclusion?
Yeah, so the thing that it means for most people is, at least as of right now, most people are not going to get student loan forgiveness. So whatever debt you currently owe is likely going to have to be the debt that you pay back. Now, I do want to point out that there are still more targeted student loan forgiveness programs available, just as there are more targeted income-driven repayment plans available. So, student loan forgiveness isn't completely gone away. Some people, for example, teachers at low-income schools, or people who work for nonprofits or the government, or folks who are permanently disabled, can still potentially get access to, again, more targeted student loan forgiveness. That said, the broad student loan forgiveness could happen in the future, though this recent ruling from the Supreme Court, basically in a nutshell, what they said is that while the president and the Department of Education may have the authority to modify student loans in some way, they essentially don't have absolute authority. So in other words, they might be able to offer an income-driven repayment plan, but that doesn't mean that they can automatically cancel student loan debt for tens of millions of Americans across the country. You can debate the merits of that case. You can debate the merits of their ruling, whether or not they should have even been ruling in this in the first place. But nonetheless, the Supreme Court is the highest authority on the law in the land. And so without congressional action, this seems pretty unlikely to go forward, at least in the near future.
Now, the court basically believes that the administration needs Congress endorsement before undertaking a costly program. Can you just explain why this is viewed as a costly issue for, Congress or the court?
Yeah, so, it's important to point out that this broad student loan forgiveness didn't cancel all student loans, nor did it apply to everyone. It was targeted to folks who in 2020 or 2021 made less than $125,000 and who had federally backed student loans, and they could get $10,000 or $20,000 worth of their debt forgiven, depending on whether or not they had a Pell Grant while in school. And usually Pell Grants are given out to folks from lower income families. That said, we're talking about tens of millions of people across the country. This program could have cost upwards of, I think, $400 billion or so. And, you don't need an economist to tell you that $400 billion is, as it turns out, a very large amount of money, surprisingly. So, it is something that there was concern about that. And there is, certainly some concern about maybe the president by himself saying, hey, I'm going to go spend $400 billion. Now, of course, there is a lot of nuance. It's worth pointing out that other things the government does cost considerably more than what this forgiveness would have cost. It's worth pointing out that while this would have cost a lot of money, it probably could have saved even more money in the long term, probably could have resulted in more stimulation of the economy. So it's not entirely cut and dry. But again, regardless of how anyone personally feels about it, in this case, the opinions that really matter are those of the 5 Supreme Court justices who ruled this unconstitutional and, in effect, stopped it in its tracks.
Now, in regard to this situation, people opposed to student loan forgiveness brought up the HEROES Act. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so the HEROES Act was passed in, I believe 2003, and it essentially gives Congress, or gives the Department of Education, the ability to modify student loans in response to a national emergency or something like a war. So in 2003, the thing that was on everyone's mind was, of course, 9/11. And so this time we didn't have an act of terrorism that caused national emergency. We had the COVID-19 pandemic, which, again, I'm sure we all will probably vividly remember in ways that we wish we could forget. Nonetheless, the Department of Education, the Biden administration looked at the HEROES Act, which, by the way, was used in part to extend the student loan payment pause, which is rapidly coming to an end. It's not what started the payment pause, but it was the thing that gave the Department of Education, the authority, rather, to continue that payment pause, to continue the interest pause. So it was being actively used. It's just in this instance, the Biden administration tried to use it a little bit more actively. And while the legislation does give the Department of Education some leeway when it comes to modifying student loans, the Supreme Court ultimately decided it doesn't give them enough leeway to broadly cancel student loans.
Now, you mentioned that President Biden has made an effort to cancel student loans. However, there are advocacy groups that, are still pushing for this and saying that he can do more. I kind of want to dissect this a little bit. Is there room to do that after this decision?
Well, to the Biden administration's kind of credit, something that I'm sure the advocates would be very thrilled to know is that they're still trying. So now the Biden administration, they're going to go forward and try broad student loan forgiveness, citing authority from a different act, the Higher Education Act, which was passed in the 60s. Now, with that said, as we've been talking about, the fact of the matter is the Supreme Court seems pretty hostile to this kind of thing being done by executive action. Personally, I'm very skeptical that they'll suddenly change their tune just because the Biden administration is citing a different law, but trying to ultimately do basically the exact same thing. Again, you can really debate the merits of this. I'm sure there are plenty of law professors out there and a lot of individual people who truly believe that the president has the authority to do this, that the Supreme Court is wrong in their decision. But ultimately, based on their most recent ruling, based on how generally hostile they seem to this being done by executive action, personally, and I know people don't want to hear this, but personally, I wouldn't get my hopes up that we'll see broad forgiveness anytime soon, certainly not without an act of Congress, which, right now Congress is pretty divided, so that doesn't seem particularly likely, at least not in the near future. Does that mean it's impossible? Absolutely not. I do hope that one day Congress does act, or maybe Supreme Court sometime in the future does say the president has the authority to do this. But that's the future. And in the present, it seems like this probably isn't going to come to fruition anytime soon.
When will loan repayments resume?
So loan repayments are going to resume on October 1st. The Biden administration has pushed back this date a few times, as did the Trump administration. Though owing to the legislation passed to raise the debt ceiling, which you may remember from a few months ago, that can no longer be done. So come hell or high water, payments are resuming on October 1st. Interest is going to start being collected again on September 1st. Now, there is one caveat that's worth pointing out. While payments are resuming on October 1st, there is going to be a 12-month grace period where missed payments, they're not paused, your loans are still going to collect interest, but where missed payments aren't going to be reported to credit rating agencies. So in other words, you'll have some leeway to maybe miss a few payments here or there. Your interest will continue to collect, your loan will get bigger, but at least for about a year, your credit score won't take a hit. So there is a little bit of a silver lining, though. Again, payments are resuming on October 1st. Do not count on that being pushed off again.
So we have a few months until October. What are some ways people can prepare?
So, what's actually kind of fun is that, earlier, about half an hour ago on this very show, you had somebody from AARP kind of coming out and saying, here are some ways to save. And I know people often talk about AARP is for older folks. Well, the truth is that I read a lot of those saving tips that they gave. They apply to pretty much everyone. So, one way is to really just start saving, preparing, putting that money aside so you can make your student loans. That could mean cutting back on other things like eating out or using coupons at the grocery store so you've got more money left over to make your student loans. So that's really the big thing. You really want to be sitting down right now, as you're watching this, logging into your student loan account, figuring out how much you owe. A lot of people haven't made a payment since March of 2020, so they might have forgotten. So refamiliarize yourself with where you stand, and then start budgeting. And if you are in a situation where you're saying, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this, get in touch with the Department of Education or your student loan service provider right away. There are still programs, as I mentioned earlier, for more targeted forgiveness. There are programs for income-driven repayment plans that exist. Not everyone will qualify for these programs. However, they can be a really significant help to the folks who do, specifically lower income folks. So really, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is be as proactive as possible right now. Don't wait until October 1st to start thinking about your student loan payment, because that's probably just going to make your life a whole heck of a lot more difficult than it needs to be.
Well, Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this discussion.
Yes, I wish we were here to talk about better news, but I'm happy to be here regardless.
To keep up with any updates regarding the student debt relief fight, please go to www.studentaid.gov. We have to take a quick break. We will be back with more Open right after this.
Where did the time go? Somehow I lost all those years. Where did the time go? I don't know how I got here. How did I get here? I can see now.
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
We all know what it's like to feel alone. But it just takes one new connection. Want to get out of here? To empower many.
This is unbelievable.
It doesn't take a superhero to bring forces together. We all have the power to reach out
Let's go!
and help someone feel like they belong.
Pretty cool, huh?
We are stronger together.
Welcome back. Girl Be Heard is an organization that strives to encourage open discussions among young people on social justice issues affecting their communities, such as racism and gender inequality. They provide educational programs in underserved parts of New York City where participants engage in theatrical activities that empower girls, young women, and gender diverse youth. Before we meet our guests, let's take a look at this clip that shows you just how inspiring this organization can be to these young women.
Around the world, keep your hope, speak your truth. We're girls empowered, girl be heard. We create movements with our words. We stand for justice, fight for rights. Just watch us as we drop the mic. Girl be you, girl be me, girl be she, girl be we. Around the world, with our words, watch our magic, girl be heard.
Joining me to discuss the organization is company member Nicole Mercedes and the director of programs, Nella Mupier. I want to thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us. We're glad to be here.
Now, can we just talk about how Girl Be Heard actually began?
So Girl Be Heard is a New York-based organization with both national and global roots. We were birthed almost 11 years ago here in New York City. And just as you stated earlier, our mission has been and continues to be collaborating with girls, young women, and gender-expansive youth to use storytelling, art, performance, and theater to amplify social justice issues. And I love the work that we do. And I often say when I speak to others about Girl Be Heard that this is precisely the type of organization that I wish that I had when I was Nicole's age. I mean, in a city like New York, where opportunities for young people in the areas of youth development, education, and enrichment is so rich, Girl Be Heard is unique in the sense that we uphold developing activist voice, developing leadership skills, and developing artistic skills as integral parts of our programming. So it's really exciting to be here to share with you and the Bronx community at Open more about what we do at Girl Be Heard.
Now, I understand that there are several branches throughout New York City. Can you just tell us a little bit more about them?
Yeah, so our menu of programs is very robust. And as we lean into the participant community, we continue to expand those programs yearly. We have flagship programs in New York City that currently consist of our school-based programs, which you can participate in if you happen to be at a school where we're funded. We have our weekend workshop program, which is a borough-based program. We have one in the Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens. It's a stipend-based program for young people who are interested in developing and deepening their skills in arts and social justice. We have the Artistic Company, of which Nicole is a member, and they represent the most public-facing participants of the Girl Be Heard community. It's a pre-professional paid opportunity for young artivists. So artists and activists looking to combine those skills to amplify social justice issues. Those run from October through June, so aligned with the academic school year. In addition to that, however, we have our special projects, which really are an expansion of the interpretation of our mission. Included in that is our Girls Make Media program, which is wonderful for young folks who are interested in Girls Make Movies, the podcasting program. We have opportunities for young people in the global sense through our B workshops.
Right.
We have finally, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is the summer experience.
So I want to talk about the fact that there's a focus on youth. Can you just tell me, as someone who's part of the youth, why that's so important and what that means to you?
Yeah, well, the youth are our future and the hope of our future. And it's the youth that are transforming our society and reality and evolving our society consciously or not. So it's up to us to be responsible for the future that we want to see and the change we want to make.
And I also want to ask you about just your role that you have, in Girl Be Heard and like some of the stuff that you do.
Yeah, so as a company member, we all just create art to really speak up on the social justice issues that we really care about. And we work together as a collective, and it really just become a leader and a change maker together as a team.
And then you wanted to...
What Nicole said is so true. Being a girl is risky business. And I like how we stated it in our impact report not too long ago. Nearly 800,000 girls in New York City, 75% of which are youth of color, many of whom live underneath the poverty level, are confronted in their schools and in communities with issues such as sexual violence, teen pregnancy, gender-based violence. We're talking about bullying and things of that nature. And in addition to that, they're navigating complex issues of intersectionality, including race and class and gender inequality. So there's a lot going on with girls in our community. And so there's a need for programming like Girl Be Heard. To Nicole's point, however, we need their voices as well, because we also know these young folks to be creative. We know them to be very passionate about social justice issues. So our framework allows within the workshop scope for them to develop their activist voice, for them to be able to develop fluency on social justice issues in an artistic way, offering multiple artistic pathways to have a conversation with their community about what's going on.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that Girl Be Heard has equally helped me to develop my artistic, activist, and even personal development skills to really speak on these issues and be a leader on the stage and off the stage as well. And what really is amazing about it as well is that we are also critical thinkers and we are energized citizens. So it's very educational, and it's beautiful to know that you're part of a larger mission to help girls and young women and people that look like us to be in more positions of power and to make their mark on the world, which we have yet to see.
Now, can you talk, I heard the term artivist, which I think is it's a really cool term. I like it. Can you just talk about some of the ways that you, or maybe your peers, have used art, poetry, and theater as a form of expression and social commentary?
Yeah, well, we really create, again, we're all about storytelling that's rooted, whether it's singing, dancing, spoken word poetry, all of it. We really just create productions and devise pieces that speak to us, and we work with our teaching artists and they really help us and along the way, along each step of the path to just help us gain the confidence to speak about issues that are, maybe difficult to share and to spark the conversations that we need to be having. And the great thing about it being art is that, there's so many ways to represent it and for audiences to connect to it and so much humanity and so much connection. You can visually represent something on stage if you can't explain it in words. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I want to know a little bit about the Girls Outside summer experience. I can imagine it's summertime, and when school's out, so many things could happen. So you can just talk about that experience and why it's offered to these girls.
Yeah, so I am thrilled to share the Girls Outside summer experience and refer to it as a summer experience because it really is just that. I mean, we all know that a lot of times New York City youth like to remain in their separate corners. So if you're from the Bronx, you stay in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and so on and so forth. The summer experience is an opportunity for young people to explore all of New York City and really tap into the cultural and artistic vibrancy that this city holds. Specifically, really, however, lean into the ways people of color, women, gender expansive folks have contributed to those spaces that in a lot of ways today we don't see. So in offering the summer experience as a programming option for young people in the city, we're allowing them to understand how we built this city, and then also develop that sense of belonging to these different spaces. I mean, it is a wonderful opportunity for young folks to have an interest in developing community, getting their whistle wet about Girl Be Heard, understanding how much we really center this aspect of community building. It is a completely free program. Lunches are paid, admission into all the excursions are paid. You get a weekly Metro card. It's an excellent opportunity. And so I believe at the time this show airs will be our first day, but it will not be too late. So if you happen to come across it and you want to participate, we have our information available for those who are interested in hearing more about it.
So
or applying.
I love hearing about this. Like you mentioned, I wish this was something that I had when I was like in high school, because I think it's just an amazing opportunity. I want to know your experience though. How, like, obviously it's for youth to grow and to learn, but how have you learned and grown, just being a part of this organization?
I've learned and grown in a number of different ways. I mean, I'm in a leadership role, so even still, I'm developing my capacity for leadership, and that's one of the things that we do at Girl Be Heard. Beyond that, and I think above that, is just how inspired I am by artists like Nicole, who, despite the other competing priorities and obligations that they have as young people navigating this city as a young person, still come to a space like Girl Be Heard and say, I want to be able to engage my community in conversations about racial justice, gender equity, environmental justice, educational justice, global solidarity, because we have to move the needle more towards an environment, a society we want to see where girls are safe, where people of gender diverse backgrounds are safe, where people of color are safe. And so I'm inspired by the perspective that they bring. I'm inspired by the heart that they bring. I'm inspired by how poised and eloquent they are. I'm inspired by how fearless they are. So that's really what has been driving me in my capacity as director of programs for Girl Be Heard.
And I also like to hear that these conversations are being had now, because I think that when I was in high school, we did not have these conversations, or it was almost controversial to even say things that we now know as the truth. So I just think that it's so interesting to see that we're in a time where we could have younger people have really tough discussions and then use art to talk about it. Can you just talk about maybe, what you hope to see as somebody who's a part of the youth? What do you hope to see for the future of this program and for girls after you?
Yeah, so I mean, being a part of this program has really just helped me to speak up on these issues, be a leader, and just, stand up for what I believe in. So I hope that, we can continue that mission, and just, especially when we're sharing it around so many different spaces and areas. And so I just really hope that every girl that is a part of this and maybe wants to, really inspire the world and really stand up for these issues, they can do that. And again, we have yet to make our mark. So,
well, I want to thank you both so much for joining us and having this wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
If you or someone you know would like to get involved and join Girl Be Heard, please go to their website at www.girlbeheard.org. And don't forget to follow them on social media at Girl Be Heard. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Files Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Jaime on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.